Well, good day to you. It is April the 27th, and I hope you are having a fantastic day wherever you happen to be. My name is Gary Willing, and even though I can't see you, it's really good to see you. Now, if you've never listened to Search for Signs before, what we talk about on this channel, we talk about the emergence of Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom. We talk about why are they returning now to the everyday world. Of course, what does it mean for you? But I would say the most important thing that we could discuss together, think about for ourselves, inquire it within our own selves, and of course, what we could do to try to manifest in our own lives once we turn these videos off is the truth that we are one. Now, I'm sure you've heard that before about the fact that, humanity is one, the oneness of mankind, unity and diversity, for instance, that kind of thing. Whether you believe it or not, for most of us, it's just words, right? Because if it wasn't, and we were living to that principle, and keeping that on the forefront of our mind, at least, our lives would be much different, right? Individually and even for the whole world, right? But, we're not. And that's the reason why we have the problems that we have. In fact, the teacher himself said something like this. He said, all of life's problems, all of our sorrows, all of our pain and suffering, even all of our ills, are the direct result of us believing that we are separate, which there's no truth to it. But it always begs the question, is it true that we are one, right? And then if it is true that we are one, is it even possible to manifest that in real life on planet Earth in 2021? Is that possible? Well, what if I told you that the answer to both of those questions is yes? Now, what would make me say that, and how can I even say that, right? Well, the first thing are we one, right? And is it, and then like I said, is it possible to ground it in real life, right? So the first question, are we one, really can be proven by two things. And the two things couldn't be more opposite from one another, and just like in life itself, in every country in the world, within groups of people, even within families, the division seems quite impossible to bring together, right? But yet there's unity, right, in this division. It's kind of interesting to see this. So what am I talking about? Well, the first thing are the many miracles that have been going on all around the world in all walks of life and have been for decades. They're happening to people who are not practicing religion and to every single religious group. The Christians are having their own religious miracles. The Hindus are having theirs. Jewish people are having theirs. Buddhists are having theirs, of course. And the Muslims are having theirs. But like I said, even people who are not practicing any kind of religion are having their own miracles too. So miracles like healing waters, crosses of light, crop circles, UFO sightings, lights over Jerusalem, the Norwegian spiral, people being saved by accidents, by angels and so forth. Images in the clouds are other examples. And I don't normally talk about this, but, really, you don't have to go much farther than just looking at the images in the intro of each one of my videos, because in the intro and the outro of my videos, I have nothing but images of these miracles. But you can do your own research online. You can go to Google crosses of light or healing waters of Tlacote, Mexico, or UFO sightings or crop circles. It really is true what one of these masters said. The age of miracles has no end. And they just keep getting more and more and more and more. But I said they're happening to everyone. Now, the thing about these miracles, too, is that by and large, most of the people who are experiencing these miracles are experiencing a greater sense of hope for the future, an expectancy of the future, perhaps. And because that hope is happening to everyone in all walks of life in every country around the world, then therefore it would be safe to say that hope is for all mankind and not just for one particular religious group, which is another way of saying, hey, we are one. And then the other teacher I think is teaching us that we are one is the exact opposite of these miracles. It's the problems that are facing humanity. Now, you don't have to go very far in searching for the problems that are facing humanity, right? I mean, every time we wake up, we have these problems as a people. The environmental problem, injustice around the world, of course, political divisions, war, crime, violence, all these problems that are facing humanity on a daily basis must be tackled together as one humanity. For instance, the environment. You can't just have one or two people solve the environmental problem and the other billions of people not do anything about it, right? You can't even have one or two countries, even if it's a large country like the United States or China, solve the environmental problem for that country. It's not going to help. Every country has to get involved in solving this problem. But then if you look at injustice, right? Here in the United States, over the last year, there have been more and more marches for justice in this country, racial justice. And that's a fine thing, and that's a noble thing, and we need to do it. But at the same time, it's not going to eliminate injustice all around the world until we look at something as gross and as criminal as starvation in a world of plenty, which is a gross injustice too. We have to tackle that as well as a people, or there will always be injustice in the world. Even if we solved the injustice problem here in the United States perfectly, we would still have that going on. You see what I'm saying? So we have to tackle these problems together. And I think these problems are teaching us, whether we're aware of it or not, that we are one, because we have to tackle these problems together. But the next question would be, to be answered would be, can we ground oneness in real life, in time, in 2021 on this little planet called Earth? And again, I think the answer is yes. And the teacher has laid out a very simple path to doing this. He says, without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. And without peace, there could be no future. And peace is another way of saying unity, really. And it starts with the principle of sharing. And real quick, I like to talk about this so we can kind of get on the same page about what is principle sharing. If you looked at what happened right after World War II with the Marshall Plan, the United States gave excesses of what they had freely to Western Europe to help rebuild Western Europe. It did so quite nicely. Western Europe started to create their own resources, which in turn they gave back to the United States in payment for what they initially took. The Marshall Plan lasted for about 4 years. And if you look at it after it ended even, and for the last 70 or so years since it ended, the United States and those nations that participated in the Marshall Plan have more of a peaceful, trusting, goodwill relationship with each other than any other nations on the planet. None of those nations have attacked one another. Those nations actually communicate and their problems and their in a peaceful manner. For instance, they don't act out violently toward one another. And also, even for us individuals living in those countries, it's much easier to travel to those countries, isn't it? And you don't have to cut through a lot of bureaucratic red tape and jump through a lot of hoops just to go from the United States to, let's say, Germany or England, right? But how difficult would it be for somebody in the United States to travel even just to Cuba or to Iran or North Korea? It'd take a lot of bureaucratic red tape to get that done. So, something to think about. And I always like to leave everybody with this when it comes to the intro. If 4 years of sharing amongst a small group of people can prove that, and an ending can prove that it can create a peaceful, goodwill relationship, even 70 years after it ended, what would the world look like if every nation participated in a global Marshall Plan and it never ended for the next 7 years and it just kept going? What would life look like then? That's the question at hand, right? So now I do have some questions to cover and some comments usually in each video. And I love questions because it helps us to focus on what we want to talk about. I encourage questions, and you can by posting questions as a comment in the video. You can also email me at searchforsigns@mail.com. There are links in the description where you can do your own research and answer your own questions if you'd like. That's probably a much better way of doing it. And they're kind of organized out, and you can kind of see which link you want to go to first. But you can also do your own independent investigation and see for yourself that there are miracles that have been going on, and there's also the problems that are going on as well. Those are a lot easier to find. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. But anyway, hopefully you'll do that. And then in this video, I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment I want to cover and some things I want to talk about too. First, I want to make it a quick announcement. If you haven't heard about the humanitarian crisis in India, With COVID, it's apparently getting quite serious there. I mean, it's always been serious, but it's getting quite bad. I'm not a big proponent of, having your service work be just praying for somebody, and that's it, and thinking that's good enough, because I do think we have to take action. Like even Maitreya says, man must act and implement his will. So, but he also did say, be at peace and remember to pray. So, if I could encourage all of us to say a prayer for those who are really going through it in India, hopefully that will help, because we are all one, and it affects us even though we're not in that country. So hopefully we will. And also, I've put a new link in the description of these videos, and I'll keep it up there ad infinitum. It is actually a link to the YouTube channel for Krishnamurti, and I was listening to this talk that he gave back in 1981. Now, if you don't know who Krishnamurti was, Krishnamurti lived, he passed away in the 80s, but he lived for quite some time. He was a teacher, maybe not super well known, but a lot of people have heard his name. He came out of the Theosophical group, and he was actually being prepared to be the world teacher for this age, just as Jesus was 2,000 years ago. And it was the original plan of the masters up until the ending of World War II, that meaning Krishnamurti, would be the world teacher and kind of set humanity on the right path into the age of Aquarius. And then eventually, maybe 1,000 or so years from now, the masters would be coming back like they are now. And what happened was, with the advent of the nuclear bomb, Maitreya had to scrap the plan of Krishnamurti being the world teacher for this time, and the masters coming back 1,000 years from now, and they had to hasten their return. And so that's the reason why we're still probably in this kind of time of limbo where there's not a lot of change, but yet the masters are kind of slowly, gently coming back into the world, is because they're coming back far sooner than they had originally expected. Now, according to Maitreya, Krishnamurti was really a true disciple of the teachings of Maitreya. He really lived it moment to moment. Honesty of mind, sincerity of spirit, and attachment. You can really see it and hear it when you hear him talk. Now, this particular, and he was also overshadowed by Maitreya and trained when he was young to be overshadowed by Maitreya, just the same way that Jesus was from about the age of 13 to the baptism where it was complete. Jesus was even trained in that way. But if you listen to this video, the remarkable thing about this video is the demeanor and the voice of Krishnamurti changes, and it becomes a little deeper than he normally would speak it. And I don't know for sure, but I am 95 to 99.9% sure that he was being overshadowed by Maitreya when he was giving this talk. But even then, even if he isn't, the teachings that he's teaching the group, and if you listen to it, you as well, are the teachings of Maitreya, and I definitely recommend checking it out. So hopefully you will. And I said the link's in the description. So let's get on into the comments. First one says, comes from Mary. It says, beware of false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. And I'm sure she's referring to Maitreya. Well, that doesn't really apply to Maitreya, but because he has no personal agenda like that. But you can really see it, and you can see it with the religious teachers, you can see it with the gurus, you can see it with our political leaders, and so forth and so forth and so forth. In fact, actually, in that video I was talking about, Krishnamurti says not to rely on anybody because our world leaders cannot handle the problems of today. Our, so-called doctors. He even talks about he even calls out the gurus and the religious leaders, the same way. So, but thank you for your comment. All right. Now, this one actually I really wanted to talk about too. And this one comes from XXYX. And this person said it was in reference to what I was talking about in the previous video about the sword of cleavage. And this person said that the Christ does not divide, he unifies. And that's true. And a couple things. One, if you go back and listen to what I said in the previous video, I did not say that the Christ divides anything. But, and here's the but, here's the rub. I do really thank you for that critique, because when I listened to it too, I could see where you're coming from. So I'll have to do a better job of explaining what I mean by that, so that it's not misinterpreted again. So I really do thank you for that. But the sort of cleavage, what Jesus was speaking to in the Bible, and it's a very popular scriptural, text. Jesus said, "I come not to bring peace, but a sword, to set father against son, mother against daughter, brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor," right? We've all heard this. Now, what I was talking about and why I was mentioning it is people have a tendency to misinterpret that to mean that there should never be peace on earth, because if Jesus said that he comes not to bring peace but a sword, then there shouldn't be peace. And I don't think that is what Jesus meant. Now, you have your own interpretation of what it is, maybe, but my interpretation of what Jesus said has nothing to do with that. And then they also kind of tend to, since I'm talking about peace and how Maitreya talks about how peace is the most important thing and humanity must achieve peace, that therefore he must be the false prophet because Jesus didn't talk about peace like that, right? Well, or that peace is impossible. What I think the sort of cleavage is from coming from the Ageless Wisdom Teachings, it's not that the Christ divides. I didn't mean it like that, and I didn't even say it like that. Is the energy of the Christ stimulates who and what we all are. So it makes us more of who we are, whatever our characteristics are, our natural way of living life, it exacerbates that. So if you're living life very selfishly, it makes you even more selfish. If you're living life very fearful, it makes you even more fearful. And if you're very conservative, it makes you even more conservative. If you're progressive, it makes you even more progressive. Even to the point where you want the changes to happen now, even if it's not safe for those changes to come as quickly as you might like, you want it to happen now. And it really brings out who and what we all are. It did it even during Jesus's time, and he, even though he was speaking to a relatively smaller amount of people, because he was just speaking to the people in Palestine at the time. There was no mass communications. There was no global, way of travel. There wasn't even any knowledge of other countries really per se. When Jesus was alive, he was just speaking to a few hundred people, really, a much smaller group of people than the Christians imagine in their own mind. But even during his time, and even amongst the people that he was coming in contact with, that energy was creating that same division. Well, it wasn't, let me go back. It wasn't creating it was stimulating the division that was already there, I guess is my point. So that the powers that be that were against what Jesus was saying, it became even greater for them to hate what he had to say. I mean, you would think that somebody coming in talking about love, talking about the law of cause and effect, living harmlessly and so forth, it would be accepted by everybody, right? But it wasn't, right? And it still isn't, right? So the powers that be that saw him as a threat, it became even more exacerbated in their character, right? But even those people who were with Jesus and standing for Jesus and learning from what he had to say and seeing the value in what Jesus was saying, it was making them more of that too. And so the division was there. And so even though Jesus was talking about it in a prophetic way, I think he was also talking about it. It's the universal way that the Christ energy, stimulates all mankind. And so now it's on an even bigger, grander scale because of the way that the world is now. We're living in a totally different world than we lived 2,000 years ago, obviously, right? But that energy has the same result. Now, it's also a temporary situation, and it will eventually synthesize thoughts. Even the political divisions will eventually become synthesized. and the economic divisions will eventually become synthesized. The nationalism amongst each one of these nations will eventually become synthesized. Not that these nations will lose their own identity. They will start to create this unity in diversity, And one example I like to use, I saw this some years ago, but the former minority leader in the Senate, his name was Tom Daschle, very, very liberal. And then there was Bill Frist. He was a doctor who was very conservative. He was the majority leader in the Senate. They both were removed from office some time ago. And they both, when they were in Congress, were very much at each other's throats politically. You know what I mean? They didn't see eye to eye on very much. But once they were out of office, these two very, very different who had very different political ideologies are coming together to help solve the lack of clean drinking water around the world. With the one organization, which is Bono from U2, has this organization called Oneness. Here you go. And they were sitting side by side as they were being interviewed, and they were both very, very passionate about eliminating the injustice of lack of clean drinking water around the world. They said it actually more people die of lack of clean drinking water than anything else in the world. It's the pollution, it's the this, you know what I'm saying? So, but they were very passionate about working together with this. So that's kind of, I think, a microcosm of how it will look in each one of these nations with the political divisions, where these political parties will eventually work together, take the best of the Republican Party, the best of the Democratic Party, for instance, and get rid of the worst part of it, come together to solve the problems of the world. But the other thing, too, which is a little bit more of a esoteric view of what's going on, too, is Maitreya himself is being overshadowed in the very same way that Jesus was overshadowed by him 2,000 years ago by two very, very high, very, very pure avatars. They're so high, they're so pure that they can't even live in the solar system. The first one is the avatar of synthesis, and the other one is the spirit of peace and equilibrium. And the schisms that we're seeing in the world, because of the result of the Christ principle, is also being exemplified, I guess, or exacerbated, to use that word again, by one of these great avatars, the spirit of peace and equilibrium. Because that energy from that avatar is working within the law of cause and effect, which is very much of equal and opposite, isn't it? And according to Benjamin Creme, that energy from that one avatar that's creating temporarily the schisms, it's like I said, it's stimulating who and what we all are. It's also bringing the corruption of the political and economic institutions to the surface so they can be dealt with. But it's just will eventually spring back the other way. So with the world that we have today, with all the divisions, will eventually spring as far to the other side in terms of synthesis, unity, cooperation, and brotherhood, and it will happen quite rapidly. And that's the reason why the energy is stimulating us the way that it is. That's the purpose behind it. So hopefully that gives a little bit more of an indication of what I was talking about when it comes to the sword of cleavage. But thank you so much for the critique on that. I appreciate it. Now, lastly, I'm coming to my favorite part of the video, and hopefully you've listened to the video this long to hear this. I love to read these articles from Benjamin Creme's master because they are so full of truth, but yet very simple, and it really kind of, I think, if you listen to it, will show you how these masters will speak and how they'll teach us. Very simple, but yet full of truth, and nothing but truth. Now, this particular article is talking about the response to Maitreya's first set of interviews on TV. Now, I'm not the only one claiming this, but what I'm claiming on this channel is that Maitreya has been speaking on TV and has been for over a decade, and it hasn't stopped. And I know a lot of people think just because Benjamin Creme isn't alive to publish the countries in which Maitreya is giving interviews, that they somehow think in their own mind that it's stopped, and it hasn't. And he talks about how it's not going to ever stop, really, But he also talks about the simplicity of his words and kind of how the first interview came about and the direct result of it. So hopefully you'll listen to this. And then if you're interested in these articles, definitely recommend going to the Share International website. You can read them for yourself. There's also a link in the description to an Amazon store where you can actually buy A Master Speaks, which is the book that I'm reading this from. So anyway, but I'll also, before I read this, Maitreya said to me on the streets of Marietta, he said, "You'll see me on TV real soon, and we're going to change the world together." So this is kind of, I think, what he's talking about here. Now that Maitreya has stepped forward into the open arena of the world and has appeared several times in full view of the television cameras, we can take stock of what has been achieved so far, and to some extent interpret the reaction of those who have seen and heard him. Bear in mind that in these preliminary approaches to the public, Maitreya has been careful not to frighten away those he wishes to help by too great an emphasis on change, too drastic and radical a program for renewal. While critical of our present practices in financial matters, bringing pain and hardship to millions, he praised men for their many achievements and their readiness to aspire to the creation of a better world. The response so far could be classified as muted but thoughtful, echoing the quiet earnestness of Maitreya's thought. One must remember that Maitreya was presented as an ordinary man, one of us, not as a messiah figure from on high. Thus, reactions of men were natural and honest, a true reflection of their fears and hopes. Of course, reactions varied with the background of the viewer, but Maitreya is well pleased with the response thus far. From this point on, Maitreya will step up the need for urgent change, the necessity for peace based on justice and sharing. He will also focus attention on the plight of the planet Earth and the responsibility of men for its problems. Thus will the great Lord orchestrate a mounting crescendo of action for the reestablishment of our world and life. Interviews of this kind will continue to be given around the world, awakening men everywhere to their opportunity to set to rights their life, to create justice and peace by sharing, to see themselves as one, to end forever the competition and greed which for so long has held men back from their destined path to divinity. Thus will Maitreya coax men out of their long slumber and awaken their desire for change. Thus will grow a great informed world public opinion, the greatest force on earth. Against that mighty force, no reactionary platform can stand. Humanity itself, inspired and vitalized by Maitreya, will reinvent their future, and through freedom and justice for all establish the era of goodwill and manifested love. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.